الاقتصادي مع استعراض أبرز تجارب قطاع الاتصالات ومنشآت الطاقة والمنشآت المنتجة للمياه في التميز التشغيلي لعملياتها. يهدف المؤتمر إلى وضع معايير تؤدي إلى سرعة تنفيذ العمليات من خلال زيادة الدخل وتسريع تحديد الوقت المناسب للتسويق مع تقليل فترة تجهيز المنتجات، وهو ما سيساهم في زيادة إنتاجية المنشأة ويعزز من أرباحها وأدائها المالي، مما يحقق رضا العملاء ويرفع تفاعل الموظفين ويزيد استدامة المنشأة. في أوبكس السعودية ستكون للشركات مساحة جديدة لتوسيع شبكتها المهنية أو مشاركة العلامة التجارية مع صناع القرار أو اقتناص فرصة استثمارية جديدة. هنا حيث نسابق المستقبل ونصنع التغيير.
نجدد الترحيب بكل الحاضرين لهذا اليوم، ونرجو أن تقضوا بصحبة الجلسات الحوارية لهذا اليوم وقتاً مزهراً بالنفع والفائدة والمتعة. قبل أن أدعو أول المتحدثين في هذا اليوم، أنوه إلى هاشتاج مؤتمر التميز التشغيلي الموجود على موقع التواصل الاجتماعي تويتر، مع كل الشكر حقيقة والتحية والتقدير لكل من غرد في هذا الهاشتاج من وزراء ومسؤولين وجهات وحاضرين ومشاركين. ندعوكم ونكرر الدعوة لأن تنقلوا كل انطباعاتكم وآرائكم وأفكاركم عن هذا المؤتمر هناك. العمليات التشغيلية والتميز الحكومي، تحت هذا العنوان سيتحدث إليكم وكيل وزارة البيئة والمياه والزراعة للشؤون الاقتصادية والتخصيص في المملكة العربية السعودية. رحبوا معي بسعادة الأستاذ عبدالرحمن الزغيبي.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Good morning. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولا استميح الأخوة الزملاء العذر بأن أتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية، قد يكون يمكن أكثر فائدة أن تكون الكلمة باللغة الإنجليزية لتعم الفائدة فيها. When I was honored to be asked to deliver a speech in this day, I requested my colleagues' support in having the ideas on what to talk about and what to say. And I received lots of proposals on that. But I figured out that I'm not an expert in the area of operational excellence per se. And the other part that was proposed to be presented relates to areas that some of my colleagues will present in the different sessions that relate to this event. So I thought of talking about an area where we can share some experiences that we had in the transformation of the government, in the National Transformation Program, and relate that to the operational excellence and take some lessons from that. So I will talk about the areas that relate to operational excellence in the transformation of the government that we have experienced in the last 6 years. And I may start with the question that was asked yesterday in the session that relates to excellence in water production from my colleague, Engineer Mansour al-Zunaidi, which was, how do we say that we achieved the operational excellence? And how do we measure it? How do we measure the operational excellence? First of all, the answer to the first question is, in my view, it's never ending. The operational excellence is something, per my understanding, is something that never ends. It's a continuous journey that there is always a room for increasing and enhancing the operations of any organization. But the second part that relates to the measurement of the operational excellence is really bringing the core subject that I want to talk about today that differentiates between the operational excellence in the government and the private sector. And then the basis for setting the operational excellence in each type of those organizations sets how is it measured. In the private sector, it's usually straightforward, mostly related to reals saved, costs reduced, efficiencies achieved, straightforward, mostly. And by the way, it's not, in my view, it's not a cost-cutting approach or area. It's a totally different story. But in the government side, since the governments have different objectives than the private sector, especially what relates to the social and environmental aspects, then the objectives to be achieved by the operational excellence are different. And also the measurement follows that they are differently measured. In the transformation in Saudi Arabia that started in 2015 and still being experienced, one of the main ways of reaching to operational excellence, besides many other initiatives and directions, is the privatization and private sector participation. And there is where we worked, and we want to share the experiences that we had, where does the operational excellence fit on that aspect. By its name, by its direction, by its objective, by setting it as a program, one program of the 12 programs that were launched in the NTP, it is an operational excellence direction. Why did the government go to have the private sector participate in the assets, the services, operations that the government used to do? It is mainly because of the operational excellence. Trying to reach to it, putting a program, setting it there, and then even inside that direction and that program, there are many ways to continue accelerating the operational excellence. So it is the direction, and within that, there are different ways or models that can lead to enhancing and continuously improving the operations of what the government used to do and wanted the private sector to them. I will also at the same time share some areas where we experienced and had some operational excellence aspects in the programs that we were doing in the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture, and with the sister entities in the sector, in the water and agriculture. We had the privatization program in the water sector set, designed, planned, started the execution. We reached to a matured level of execution on most of the aspects that cover and achieve the objective of private sector participation. And from year to year, there are continuous enhancements. And if we see the projects that we started with when we initiated the privatization in the water sector, and what we are doing this year, and what is planned for the future, near future years, we will see and notice the excellence that has already been achieved and still targeted, and there is still a long way to go. But I think in this coming session, my colleague Khalid Al-Quraishi, the CEO of Saudi Sharakat, will shed some light on that aspect, and we together continuously have efforts towards having those programs accelerated and enhanced. On the other side, we in the agriculture sector had issues in the operations that the ministry used to execute and operate the duties and mandates of the ministry in regards to the agriculture sector. But the agriculture sector is a bit different. It's a sector that requires some intensive social care towards the small farmers, towards the food security, and similar non-financial aspects that drive the directions of the government on that sector. We faced an issue when we started the transformation in the agriculture sector relates to the inefficiencies in delivering the services that the ministry used to deliver to the farmers. But the question was a bit difficult to be answered. Will the government put these services and operations to the private sector, or have a transition towards achieving that, or target continuing to deliver part of that service to secure the interests, the social interest of the objectives of the agricultural sector, and making sure that it leads to the food security and no shocks happen there. We elected to go in a transitional phase by creating a company owned by the government, operates the services that the ministry used to operate without getting into the services that are being delivered by the private sector, because if they are delivered by the private sector, so it is expected to be efficient and done on a sustainable manner. Now, by design for that company, we selected to focus on, first of all, we don't do except the services that are mandated to the ministry and the private sector is not yet ready to deliver. Second is to make sure that the introduction of this company operations, the governance, the design, the procedures there would lead to operational excellence on those services. And we linked that to the subsidies and support that we get from the Ministry of Finance to support the company in delivering those services in the areas where they are not profitable or financially self-sustainable. We started launching those services around 3 months ago by this company. We achieved one of the objectives of the first batch of the creation of this company by the efficiency in delivering the services, which from day one saved around 50% of the process and time consumed to deliver those services. And there is a program for other services that this company will introduce, which are expected to lead to that. At the same time, in the design of the company and its plans, we inserted the continuous improvement aspect, especially in the digital aspect and the use of artificial intelligence. The other example or experience that we experienced in the ministry relates to the water sector support from the government, the financial support that is needed from the government for the water sector. We designed a program for balancing the support that is needed for the water sector from the government, since the tariffs of the water services are preset, and do not cover the costs of delivering the service. The objective is to make sure that the water sector can continuously deliver high quality service without facing issues in the funding part that causes failure in delivering the service. That part was designed based on efficiency and operational excellence. I'll try to simplify it. The water sector needs funds from the government in order to be able to take care of its mandate and deliver the services, since the revenue generated does not cover the costs. At the same time, the government wouldn't give funding to the sector without having a plan for achieving efficiencies and continuous improvements on those efficiencies. So that program of balancing account is mainly anchored on this aspect, that it guarantees that the sector gets its funding requirements to handle the services, but at the same time, it is conditioned on an improvement and operational excellence in delivering the service. Those aspects factored into the model of the balancing account are expected to be an additional factor that will drive the water sector, especially in the production and distribution part, towards continuously increasing the efficiencies and save the need for additional funding, which may not always be ready in the normal circumstances. So this is, in brief, our part that relates to experiences that we have faced, and we hope that we have added value to this event by shedding this light on those two aspects that really emphasize first of all, the difference between the government operational excellence, that it has different objectives, and also the measurement of that should follow. The second main idea here is that it is a phasing process rather than being just one step. The government cannot be transformed in one day, but we are setting transitional periods, and transitional phases should always lead to where we can achieve the objectives of the government on its mandates. Thank you very much. شكرا جزيلا للجميع.
شكرا لسعادة الأستاذ عبدالرحمن الزغيبي. تتواصل معكم الجلسات ويتواصل المتحدثون. أوجه التميز التشغيلي كثيرة ومتعددة، ويعرف المختصون فيها كيف يحظون بأفضل ممارسة تحقق أعلى معايير الجودة. المتحدث القادم سأرحب به مرتين. الأولى أهلاً به ضيفاً كريماً على المملكة العربية السعودية، والثانية أهلاً به متحدثاً في مؤتمر التميز التشغيلي تحت عنوان التميز التشغيلي من منظور آخر. سيتحدث إليكم. رحبوا معي بالسيد خوسيه لويس دياز، الرئيس التنفيذي لأعمال المياه في إكسيونا في إسبانيا.
Good morning. First, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organization. Thank you very much to the Saline Water Conversion Corporation, Sway Governor, His Excellency, rest of authorities, and all the people that is here today. Yesterday, we have been listening to many speakers talking about an analysis and a technical approach on how to improve excellency in all type of operations. And there is very, very little I could add to that and to have what have been said yesterday. So I would like to just give a very brief approach to excellence in operations from a different angle, much wider, broad approach And it is something that I think that we all of us are aware, and in our organizations, we need also to think about it. With all the changes and all the speed that life is having nowadays, all the different situations that we're having, probably what we need to have is a complete focus and approach and excellency from a point of view of quality in everything that we do. I would like to define it as something that is in the way of we do, we aspire, and we perceive our work, our colleagues, our partners, our clients, and our organization as a whole. This holistic approach, we have many different examples, but I would like to go to a couple of them that are probably very known to us. No? This is what has driven Honda, Mr. Honda, in the 60s and the 70s to become a real success above its competitors in the engine manufacturing, the car, motorbike industry. Or not only Honda, but the whole Japanese industry to succeed in the 70s and in the 80s in many different sectors, from again, car manufacturing to all type of electronics. And this has also driven the subsequent reaction of the formerly powers of the industry, and mainly the United States, to react against that there is something that they were not doing well or that others were doing much better at that point in time. This has been also what has pushed the current technology giants to be what they are today. Normally, or almost always, under the leadership of people obsessed with quality, attention to detail, functionality, beauty, and simplicity. But there is also a main factor behind that is people engagement. This also it's a very interesting example of Tesla that you all know very well. This company, almost or only 2 years ago, we all have a lot of doubts about its viability, and many people in the industry were reluctant to believe that there would be a real competitor for them. That nowadays, only 2 years after that, Tesla market capitalization, as you all perfectly know, is more. It's higher, and to me this is extremely surprising. But it's quite higher than BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen, Toyota, GM, Ford, Fiat, Chrysler, all of them together. And this has been done by excellence in operations and full conviction. And even if it's only partial, we are not probably sure about the detailed quality of some of or all of the items of a Tesla car, but definitely there has been something in the way they have been driving operations that has become this huge success of that. Common factors, again, on this are a clear leadership, clear innovation, the full conviction not only of the leadership of these entities, organizations, but also the whole team of the people that is working on that. It's very difficult to engage these people, and if you don't empower them rightly and allow them to take decisions and allow them to question and point out what are things that we are not doing well, probably we wouldn't be able to progress in the way all these organizations have been done. Hope that we could transfer all these upsides to our sectors. In my particular case, to the water business, which is an extremely traditional and conservative in one hand, but also an absolute need that will be increasing each after year, and it's perfectly aligned with the ESG principles that are driving nowadays the economy. Again, vision and leadership, conviction, perseverance, innovation, quality and attention to detail, that to me is extremely important, and the people engagement and empowerment, also with lesson learned attitude, are probably the key factors that will allow us to achieve the real excellence in our work, and probably also in our life. So, thank you very much.
شكراً للسيد خوسيه. أيها الحضور الكريم، الاقتصاد اليوم هو الجوهر الذي يحرك كل شيء ويبنى عليه مستقبل كامل. ما أثر التميز التشغيلي اقتصادياً؟ هذا السؤال وأكثر ستعرفون إجابته مع متحدثي الجلسة القادمة التي تأتيكم تحت عنوان البعد الاقتصادي للتميز التشغيلي. واسمحوا لي بصحبتكم أن ندعو ونرحب بالضيوف المتحدثين في هذه الجلسة. رحبوا معي بالسيد خوسيه لويس دياز الذي تحدث إليكم قبل قليل. أذكر السيد خوسيه هو الرئيس التنفيذي لأعمال المياه في إكسبونا أسبانيا أو أكسيونا. رحبوا معي بالسيد بارت بوزماند وهو رئيس قسم التكنولوجيا في شركة أكوا باور في المملكة العربية السعودية. رحبوا معي بالسيد شيتان كابور وهو شريك سينرجي للاستشارات المالية في الهند. رحبوا معي بالرئيس التنفيذي للشركة السعودية لشراكات المياه في المملكة العربية السعودية خالد القريشي. رحبوا معي بالشريك الإداري في شركاء كران مور في الإمارات العربية المتحدة السيد يوسف ماكون. ورحبوا معي بمدير هذه الجلسة المسؤول التنفيذي للأعمال والشؤون الدولية والسفير الكندي السابق في وادي السيليكون السيد براندون لي. أرجو أن تقضوا بصحبة هذه الجلسة وقتاً عامراً بالفائدة والمتعة.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Brandon Lee, and I'm honored to be here as the moderator today. And good morning to all of you, to my esteemed panelists, and all of you who are spending your precious time with us here today. I'm deeply honored and delighted to be here as the moderator, where we're going to speak about the economic dimensions of the impact on operational excellence. Economics is such an important theme. And as we have been discussing for the past 2 days, operational excellence requires the total alignment and commitment of the entire organization to achieve success. We have visionaries and leaders speaking today of the digital economy, the fourth industrial revolution. We're speaking about smart cities. And our subject today on economics is one of the central themes of all of these areas. When we look at economics, investment, and financing. When we look around the economics around infrastructure, generally speaking, if you speak to somebody on the street and you talk about infrastructure, this sounds like an industrial, almost theoretical word. But in fact, it's about making the lives of our citizens and our people better. When we look at infrastructure, it begins with roads, bridges, hospitals, utilities, smart cities. These are all elements to make our citizens' lives better. So it's very real when we look at infrastructure. And when we are looking at these enormous changes that we are in now, it requires harmony and collaboration between the government, private sector, and communities. we are going to look at and learn from our experts. We have collected excellent experts around very important issues around economics, around the dimensions with regards to business models. We will talk about risk management. We're going to look at trends around future economic models, even things like decentralized finance. We will look into the future of economics and operational excellence. And most importantly, we will discuss public-private partnerships, PPPs. So with that, I'll move right along into the first question. And I'll begin with His Excellency Engineer Khalid. So by involving the private sector in developing the IWP and other utility-related projects through the PPP model, how has this enabled the competitiveness in the Saudi market and within the region?
First of all, Assalamu alaikum jami'an, sabah al-khair. And I really thanks SWEC and organizer for this nice and new in its own way of forum. And I'm honored that to be part of this panel. Back to your questions regarding involving IWBs. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia and privatization and private sector when it started in early 2000, and where we started the first IWB or IWBB that times. There was no way to produce desalinated water without using thermal desalination, which you need to produce power, so you should have IWBB. And that time they create WEC, Water Electricity Company, which was owned by two SWEC and SAC. So the first IWB was 2005, and the competition was that times only 3. Then at the end, before opening the bid, it was only left to 1. And the price was between 3.29. With energy, it reached to 4. That's in the shape of 3. That's the water cost. Then after this, is Shigeg 2, and it was the cost also higher than this. And also the competition was limited. With the recent arrangement and governments and expanding the role of WEC become a principal buyer of water, including all waters, which is part of what His Excellency Abdulrahman mentioned today about the change and the transformation being started in 2005. The second wave of a project being started in 2018. And we released the Rabo 3. At that time, so when we released, WEC negotiated a project, expanded to 250, and the price was 2.45 with a tariff of, with an energy consumption cost is by 8 halala, which is not 18 halala. So if you make a real tariff, it will be 2.8. So approximately 2.8 SAR per cubic meter. And then when we start Rabo 3, it was open tender competitions, we received 55 expression interest. It was really surprised because we start putting more what we need from, as we talked about at this conference, what we need in this country, what we need more than the price. So we put some mandate on energy efficiency, local content, and higher availability. So we were assuming that the price will be higher because we mandate more. So the price went from 2.8 or 2.45 to 1.99. And then we continue, and we believe that when we mandate something where we know, and that because of the data we collect, I mean, Saudi Arabia know in desalination 25 years, so they have a huge data. Based on that, we know that they can achieve this. So we put the mandate, not optionals. What was the market was that time, it's elective. It's up to the tenders that you make an international competition. So the price drive to be 1.99. And it was open competitions. And the bidder was five, I think it was five committed bidders. Which I mean by committed bidder mean they bought a security bond, they bought a bid bond, and they spent the cost. And when we went to the second project, and everybody was crying that time. They say, okay, the tariff was, it's impossible. We cannot go more. And we just feel scared that maybe we are driving the market to an area where it will be a problem in later. And as you know, the private sector part is a risk sharing. The developer will share the risk of financing, construction, and operation, and the government will take the risk of demand side. So, but end of the day, you need the service. And then you need to ensure that it's not only a matter of closing, you need to ensure that he can deliver 25 years. And then Shgeg 3, and Shgeg, the location was really difficult. Jose here with me, he can tell me. And it's have a different, you know, the capacity also less, little bit less. And also the price goes down 1.95. And we see that they are stretching themselves because it was open. It was open competition. So we went Shgeg 3, then Yamba 4, 1.74, then we reached to Jibel 3A Jazla, which is today, as Christopher Gasson say, it is still the record internationally at 40 cents is the lowest tariff. So that's what BBB did, or the private sector participation led to the competition. Now, if you just see between 3.5 to 4 to 1.54 within 4 years, who is getting benefits? It's the citizen. It's the country. Now, if we come, I remember we calculate the energy efficiency saving from Rabagh 3 if we compare to the previous project. In 1 year, if we calculate within the current price of energy, with a subsidy, everybody knows that we are subsidizing still the fuel. That means the energy or the cost of electricity is subsidized. I remember it was only for 1 year, 20 million Saudi riyal we are saving for one project from energy efficiency. So the energy went down because we have a capping of that energy from approximately 4 to 4.5 till 3.16. So it's continuous. So this is what is private sector can do, but in a way that you have calculated the risk and you know what is the consequences.
Thank you very much. And the next question, to build upon this, I would like us to share about new business models. So this question, first let's begin with Jose and Yusuf. But what transformations, new paradigms, or new business models in the area of economics and finance and investment lie ahead that we can look forward to? And what is the journey of excellence in this regard? Please, Jose.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you very much again to my colleagues. I'm very, very happy to be here with some of the main leaders that we have in our industry, from Aquapower to some of the best advisors we have, and of course, Khalid representing the driving force in the PPP sector for water. So in finance, I think that the main topic is sustainable finance nowadays. Many things are happening now. I mean, and probably even with what we have been hearing over the last decade, that there is an excess of capital and a shortage of good projects in which to invest this excess of capital. Probably over the last 2-3 years, the picture has changed drastically. Now, there are many things in which public and governmental funds need to be invested. Need to start from the coronavirus to the current tremendous situation that we are suffering in Eastern Europe, and all this will need a lot of capital, a lot of money, and this money will mainly come from public and governmental entities. So now we have again and the private capital. And the private capital needs to be attracted, and the projects needs to attract this private capital. And nowadays, this sustainable finance is probably the link that will bridge the gap between this situation. So again, and this is a topic that is probably getting a little bit wear and tear, but the ESG approach is also crucial and a must in finance. And the quality and the sustainability of the projects are a key factor for that. And again, as I said before, the water business is perfectly aligned with these principles, and we have a tremendous opportunity for attracting the capital that up to now, even if we did not have strong difficulties, but this is a very sector that is extremely intensive in capital needs. So I think that we have everything perfectly aligned in order to develop our sector and our business nowadays further.
Thank you very much. And Yusuf?
A couple of things. Of course, sustainability will be very, very important. No need to emphasize beyond the obvious. But I think the criteria are going to be tighter and tighter. I mean, the numbers are crazy. 400 trillion, whatever, not 400 trillion, 400 billion of green bonds and several trillion of overall climate finance, which doesn't necessarily seem to tie with reality. So I think the criteria around those will tighten for sure. Clearly, energy transition is a big trend, and finance around that will need to be adapting. And I think we see increasingly liquidity at every stage of not just debt products, but also equity products. More specifically, I think in relation to Saudi Arabia and in general, local currency finance and local currency term availability of capital and nurturing of the institutional investors into that long-term liability matching theme will be quite important. So those three themes, I think sustainability, energy transition related changes and liquidity that will be required, which will probably force the finance that goes with it to be increasingly liquid, even at early stage, even on the equity side. And finally, increasingly in pretty much every single market, the relevance of long-term institutional capital.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So we've seen that there are new models emerging, and in fact there's maybe some hype and the dust needs to settle a little bit on some of this new terminology we're seeing. But the next question is for Bart. When we look at operational excellence and stakeholder management, with all this hype and this excitement and new models being created, how does this affect various stakeholders, and how can we stay focused on operational excellence?
Thank you for the question. First of all,
press the button. Yeah.
First of all, very, very happy to be here. This is an excellent topic, excellent event, and really glad to be able to hopefully contribute a little bit. Before I answer your question, I was thinking when we were talking about sustainable finance and ESG and the importance of ESG, let's not forget there's a very strong link between ESG and operational excellence. Operational excellence is also about using resources in the best possible way, reducing the use of resources, reducing energy consumption, reducing water consumption in power generation, reducing energy consumption in water production and desalination. And look at what has been able to be realized over the past 2 decades by, and my teams, our teams, Aquapower, is proud to have contributed to it very significantly by introducing new technologies and by driving operational excellence. We come from 20 kilowatt hour for a cubic meter of water to where we are now, which is around 3. So that's impressive reduction of consumption of natural resources is directly connected to ESG and directly connected to sustainability. Now, then coming to your, I think, very relevant question on stakeholders. You know, when operational excellence entered in the energy and utility business, maybe 20 years ago, when it came from Japan, from the automobile, from a certain number of sectors, it basically entered in operations and maintenance. And it was seen, like His Excellency indicated, like cost saving only, which is a pity because it is so much more. Operational excellence is today, and therefore it is related to investment, to what we're talking about here. It covers the entire value chain. It starts when you design a plant. It starts when you select equipment. It starts when you do these very detailed reliability, maintainability, availability assessments during the design phase to really optimize for operational excellence. And that is also, by the way, what allows us to give back to society most of the value creation from operational excellence. I mean, it's in the tariff. You have seen the tariff going down. A lot of that work, there is still a lot to be done when the asset is operating, but a lot of it, with a lot of value creation, actually happens upfront during the design and development phase. There's also a significant impact on internal stakeholders because it's all about people. This is done by people. We don't like operational excellence presented as processes. Of course, we need these processes and you need to apply them. But it is much more than this. It's a mindset. We call it leaving no stone unturned. It's the mindset of always seeking better performance. This is a mindset which we need to cultivate, which we need to allow our people to practice. And I'm not saying that the private sector is that much better in it than any other sector, but at least it requires agility, because it requires you to start from the assumption that the way you did things in the past is not necessarily the best way going forward. Every time again you question, you improve. Yeah? This is the kind of mindset we try to cultivate. So that is for me an important impact on important stakeholders, which are our own people.
Excellent, thank you so much. And so you can see we have such a wealth of experience on this stage. And so to further take advantage of our precious time together, let's move quickly now to public-private partnerships and this structure. Of course, His Excellency began, but I'd like to ask Chetan to speak about an overview of how public-private partnerships has developed within the region and just your sense, because you have been involved in so many public-private partnership projects.
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's indeed a pleasure to be at this stage on this conference with some of the people who I've been working with for quite some time. And obviously we talked about the water sector, we talked about agriculture, as Khalid sir rightly mentioned. SWPC and MIWA has been at the forefront of driving this force. But in terms of PPPs, which we're talking about, is the change limited to the water sector? And the answer is no. I mean, KSA is right now at the forefront of leading the PPP chain in the GCC. And this wave is just not limited to water or wastewater, upstream and downstream, but it is also significantly manifested into or entering into various other asset classes. We talk about, if you see across, we talk about this PPP regime being extended to renewables. So power has been the starting point, and if you see the way the tariffs have gone down in the water sector, similar is the trend or wave you'll see into the power side of it. And entities like Aqua Power, like Marubeni, they have been, and Mazda, they have been one of the significant forces to enable that change because of operational excellence and because of the innovations which have happened in that sector. So power, water is definitely one. What about other sectors? We're seeing this PPP regime right now also entering into social infrastructure, which is healthcare and education. You see, in the past 1.5 to 2 years, there have been multiple bids on the education side of it, building more schools. You will see, you have seen that there are more projects which are coming in healthcare, building more hospitals, building more medical cities. So, in a nutshell, this PPP is just not limited to a particular utility sector, but is now is much spread across the broader infrastructure verticals. What has enabled this? The key enablers are, the success of the utility program in KSA and in GCC, innovation, the right kind of models which are being adopted, and these models will have a mix from UK, from other parts of the world, but have been rightly successfully integrated into the KSA regime and have been rolled out. There's a tremendous support from the government. Government itself has been a forefront for enabling some of these changes, and that is bearing the fruit. And what you see is all these projects coming up going forward. With this is going to stop, I think, to our best of our opinion, and maybe my esteemed colleagues can add here more, but you'll see these projects on PPPs in sectors which were never unheard of. Going forward, it's going to just increase in number of proportions, number of sizes, and I think it's a very attractive time for all the stakeholders to be here in KSA and in GCC region to be participant into the PPP wave in the region.
Thank you very much. And because we have such deep expertise in PPPs on the stage, maybe Engineer Khaled, I can ask, with any big innovation and framework, there are positives and areas to improve. So in your experience, how can we improve PPP investment frameworks for the benefit of all stakeholders?
Thank you for the question. I think the innovation, creativity should not be stopped, and it's not been stopped. And if you look at the journey which we started earlier till now, you see that the sense of innovation on the model which we are sending to the market. We started with the normal, then we put certain mandate in local content which was not exist. We put a cap of energy. We put certain availability not being achieved. And then later on, we modify the models and we involve certain strategic reservoir in 2 days. Then we add allowance to capping using renewable energy up to 20%, and then this helped to reduce the efficiency or reduce the consumption of or the tariff, because you're using captive power inside the ring fence, then you're reducing the consumption from the grid. And then we also reduce the CO2 emitting to the environment. For instance, in Jubail 3A and 3B, when we allow renewable energy, BV, to be used, the total calculated CO2 emitted to the environment reduced 100 kiloton per year CO2. In the sewage side, we mandate certain using beneficiary sludge, which was a problem earlier, where to use, or you have to manage this sludge handling, and it costs you. Then when we mandate, it become a benefit. They use it inside the plant, and it's become a reduction of cost. Also, we evolve on delivering to the Green Initiative Saudi, what's enabling that transmission pipeline. And the recent 3 project, which is closed, and Nexiona was part of this successful of consortiums. The 25 kilometers, the 30 kilometers, that's another way, never been done. Another also innovation, creativity on the model. It was a small sewage cluster. It was very difficult to send small sewage plant to the market and BBB. It will not be attractive. So there was a clusters, which is plenty of in the same arena or regions, and then include them in order to make it working and model the collection systems. And this is also a new model, never been done. Same in number 4 that we allow also strategic and pipelines. This is all innovation, and that's not stopped. I think if you keep thinking what is missing, and then you think the other way, benchmark, see the different, and then you put your requirements. So these innovations It's started, but it will not be end. Now, also, we are thinking of more. We're trying to put something, but a step, and in a way where we ensure that we are not risking the model, but also in the same way, we just add more value to the country. And that's really the area where you can continue evolving. Always there is a risk, there is a downside, but it has to be calculated, it has to be benchmarked, discussed. And the beauty in our system in Saudi now, we have different layer of checkpoints. We are in Saudi partnership we have our consultant and advisors. Then it go to the teams, which is a supervisory committee, the authority who authorized this project. Having the special teams that are reviewing this, they're reviewing and seeing the other sector what they are doing, and they're checking what we did propose, and they pass it to the other supervisory. So there is a many checkpoint till it goes to the market. That's sometimes, you know, in our NSWBC, we just get annoyed because it takes time, but it's a good in the business model. It's really in order to become our models now mature. And overall, really, Saudi Arabia now, I claim it is the pioneer leading of the PPP, at least in utility sectors. And I think the other sector, which is started schooling and hospital and others, will be in the same.
Thank you very much. And perhaps, Bart, if you have any other ideas on the future of PPP and how we can continue to engage and make better use of them.
I think very relevant elements have already been given, but let's maybe add one other point. We talk about operational excellence as based on agility, but it's actually also based on integrating lessons learned and integrating lessons learned from one project to the next. And that requires a certain size. So I believe the good public-private partnership, which is based on good risk allocation to which party can best manage a specific risk, should also take into account this aspect that you want to bring in people, organizations with relevant lessons learned due to their, well, often international scale, bringing in the best experience. And I believe if you care for optimal allocation of risk, this model has proven to be successful.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. International collaboration, but also healthy competition will help everyone move forward. Now, the next question is for both Jose and Yusuf, where in the private sector, of course, stability helps the private sector develop. But we are in a time when there is instability everywhere we look. Of course, we've just lived through a pandemic. We're seeing economic volatility, geopolitical volatilities. And so the world is becoming less and less predictable. Are there ways in which financial markets can improve the way they mitigate volatility caused by these global disruptive events? And even what have we learned through this pandemic and other events? So please, Jose.
Thank you, Gang. Well, that's a tough question. That's a very difficult question. And I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer at all, because even with the ups and downs that we have been suffering or living over the last couple of decades, we are now in a totally different situation. And all the disruptions that we have been seeing over the last months, supply chain, volatility, I mean, it's very difficult to play with and to manage. And in this sense, I would say that probably governmental entities, multilateral entities, export credit agencies would need to play a much more relevant role nowadays in order to be able to stabilize the main factors of financing. I would say that just in this particular case, just dealing with the private sector wouldn't solve the problem, because private sector is driven by factors that could not mitigate in a wide extent this situation. Maybe if we go also, we think about insurance companies or groups, but there is a reality that probably is not very politically correct to say, but that it's important that we are all aware about it. Insurance companies are each day less keen on insuring infrastructure projects, and the prices that we need to pay and the coverages that we have are lower. So even with that, I would say that there is a strong call now for, again, multilaterals, export credit agencies, governmental supported entities, in order to take the stage and take a step up in front in order to help to at least stabilize a little bit the situation that we're living nowadays.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And Yusuf?
I want to set the scene a little bit in relation to what's ahead of us, because I do believe that what's ahead of us intrinsically will involve imbalances continuously in supply chain and in availability of capital from time to time, etc. Just focusing on climate transition, right? Let's leave aside pandemic, let's leave aside geostrategic volatility that we are seeing now. In broad terms, each year in the next 30 years, we will need to invest as much as we have invested in the last 10 years in climate transition, potentially more. Decarbonization needs to go into complete new sectors as well that we haven't abated so far, etc. So this supply chain disruption, commodity price volatility in specific sectors is going to continue. It's not going to stop, most likely. We don't know. Of course, planning ahead is always useful. I'm not going to state the obvious, etc. But how can then the infrastructure sector do its best to cope with that? Obviously, I mean, disciplined execution, which engineer Khalid has set an example under the vision of the kingdom, etc., is extremely useful, standardizing, etc. But beyond that, I think we need to come to terms with perhaps slightly different ways of, slightly enhanced ways of procuring as well. I don't know what those may be. All of them have downsides, right? If you want to tender 10 IWPs in one go, think about the energy transition side of it, the renewable or decarbonization, hydrogen, etc. How do you do it? You need to take a degree more risk, perhaps. The supply chain is not going to wait for the decisions over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So you need to become extremely more agile, and you need to maybe think about what are the key parameters that's outside the control that the authorities may consider taking the risk of, because they fundamentally take it anyway. On the plus side, the infrastructure sector and infrastructure assets are intrinsically long-term decorrelated from that context, right? It's long-term, stable revenue profile transactions. And I think creating liquidity, on the one hand, creating supply, but also creating demand from the capital side is essential, which is exactly what SWPC has done so successfully, but more broadly, the kingdom is moving towards introducing other asset classes within the core infrastructure and core plus, let's say, infrastructure theme. That is very useful because, in essence, it locks in capital in broad terms for the long run in a stable setting, as it were. What can be done to nurture that? What can be done to nurture the liquidity beyond? I mean, one of the key issues that we've faced as well is the pace of transactions in the kingdom needs to continue, needs to demultiply, even leaving aside the climate challenge. So how can that be best managed? How can you make sure that the ecosystem doesn't suffer from deal fatigue, as it were, and there's continuous, in essence, support on the human resource side, but also on the supply chain side, etc., etc. I think I mentioned local currency. I think that's a relevant topic. There is a continuous dichotomy, not applicable to Engineer Khalid's projects, but in most other sectors, where Saudi riyals need to be available in the long term for a fixed commission, etc., which has been sometimes a challenge. If it was possible to nurture that through the basically involvement potentially of institutional investors, that would help. And yeah, it comes back to disciplined execution. But overall, I think infrastructure as a growing asset class should be moderating and helping that volatility.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And I'm mindful of our precious time together, so now I am going to change and ask specific questions about hot subjects. So one thing, this question is for Chetan, but Bart, you had mentioned ESGs before. And Chetan, I thought, this is such an important area because ESG is becoming increasingly maybe a hot topic, but increasingly important because of course the direction has to go towards ESGs. So how does ESGs impact a project's viability, and how can especially GCC countries take advantage of this?
I think this is a very important topic, and before we get into the specifics of the answers, let's take a step back and let's look as to what of the GCC countries have done till now towards ESG guidelines. So almost all the GCC countries have ESG framework ready. There's a sustainability development program which has been ratified by almost all the countries. All the countries have committed to net zero targets 2030, 2050, 2060, so on and so forth. And all of the GCC countries are moving towards implementing all of these guidelines of framework which are already in place. Now, UAE and Saudi Arabia are front runner with respect to those. Coming specific to Saudi Arabia, PIF and their sister companies are one of the champions. We recently have seen the Red Sea project getting into a complete closure of the green bonds. The number of sukuks, as one of my colleagues already mentioned, there's a huge pipeline for green bonds or green sukuks in the kingdom right now, which is going to increase further down the chain. Now, many people feel that ESG is something which is a burden, which is going to decrease the profitability. That's not the case. I think the way an analogy would work, if you see some of the sectors which have worked in KSA, the traditional sectors, the prices went down because of operational excellence, the prices went down because of innovation. Similar thing is going to happen in ESG as well. So right now, yes, it might feel that ESG is something, or compliance with ESG guidelines is something which is going to be a burden on the profitability of the balance sheet of the company or the project, but that is going to improve further. Some of the reasons or some of the important elements that needs to be kept in mind is that there has to be more access to climate finance, which is increasing as we speak. There has to be more amount of regulatory and legislative support, which again the governments are working towards it. See whether the internal organizations are equipped enough to comply with the ESG guidelines, ESG protocols. That is something which all the companies are working towards, strengthening the ESG framework, strengthening the ESG requirements within their own organization so that they are able to meet the requirements. And more importantly, increasing the awareness. I think right now, if you talk about large organizations, they're fairly comfortable, they are fairly aware as to what ESG is all about, what is climate finance is all about, and where to access it. But if you move down to tier 2 or tier 3 companies, I think that is something, that message is lost. So one of the important elements is to increase the awareness within the organizations, within the various companies, by the government, by different stakeholders, to ensure that that message is loud and clear. That ESG is an important part in the entire scheme of things, and it is going to improve the profitability of the project, and not just the profitability, but the other important peripheral areas around, which is environment, governance, and so forth, and the countries are going to hugely benefit from this.
Absolutely, thank you. And we have a hot pursuit. Yes, Bart.
Yeah, maybe if I may, one point to add on this. We should narrow down ESG to energy transition, but of course energy transition is an important part of it. And let's be clear, the kingdom has a tremendous opportunity here due to the resource, due to the renewable energy resource, due to the land availability. Not only to meet its own zero carbon targets, but even to help other countries to meet these targets. If we succeed in exporting the green fuel that can be, the green hydrogen that can be produced from renewable energy. But on top of it, this presents a potential for localization of industry. It's what we're doing every day. We're bringing these, and this is possible for the first time. Now, renewable energy, hydrogen, these technologies, they can be brought to the kingdom. These suppliers come to the kingdom. We're bringing them to the kingdom. And this is a tremendous opportunity like never seen before.
Absolutely. The opportunity is certainly enormous. And just to stay on ESG before we move on, Jose, I would love to hear from the private sector point of view. With ESG, are the GCC countries equipped enough to take advantage of some of this opportunity? And what is your advice or recommendation?
Well, wouldn't be brave enough to give any advice on it. But I think, as Bart said, probably there will be some people that could be misled or confused about that, thinking that the region being based mainly in oil and gas economy drivers is not at the forefront, could not be at the forefront of this transition. But as Bart said, there are many fundamentals that would help and would support that the reality is just the opposite. So, I mean, and if we have been able to do that in countries like Spain, that in which probably we do not have the same fundamental factors, or in Germany, that it's probably in the same situation. Here, with availability of land, the sun, there is a huge potential, and it's just a question of to me, it's very simplistic thinking, of just linking the steps properly in order to do the transition smoothly and with a sufficient backup in order not to take a mistake on that.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And to add another level of complexity to what we are speaking about, we are seeing a new digital finance, decentralized finance, and we're seeing all kinds of even digital governance models coming out. But underlying all of this, and so this is a question for our engineer Khalid, underneath all of this is data. New types of data, new data that is available to the government and private sector. So what is the significance of all of this data? People say data is the new oil, but how do you see data analytics in driving economic change?
Thank you. I think you cannot do anything without data. And nowadays, with the digital era, now you can use this data for further improvement in efficiency, in tariff, and all more mandates. And that's what we are now in SWBC and the government. We're trying to just gather all these data and then use it for further improvements for future opportunities, or in BBB is as overall. So we believe with all data, you can also take a decision with a calculated risk. But without data, without real data, analyzed data, trending, because there is a volume of data, there is analysis of data. So volume of data is another task, one task. The trending or evaluating this data and where you can position the next steps is subject to these data. So it's really an important aspect. And for example, when we start earlier, we try to put the local content on IWBs. One of the challenges that you get, what is the existing utility benchmark? You can put the starting mandate to the local, to the vendors or the lenders or the bidders on your project. So you start from 35 or 40 or 45. And the decision is on two sides have certain benefit and risk. So with the data, today for instance, we have data for Rabagh 3 and Shkeg 3, that the project in operation. So we have all data. And then based on this data, we could go further in local content or we could adjust. So that's really beauty of data and similar to the other dimensions. So data is vital and essential. And I think it's era of data today and intelligent information.
Thank you very much. And Yusuf, you began your last response by scene setting and looking at what is happening in today's world. If we look ahead as we continue our transition into the digital economy and we move forward, how do you see which infrastructure, energy, economic developments do you foresee as being crucial in the future development of our economies?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I won't sound boring, but I'll come back to the same themes. I think energy transition is probably one of the biggest challenges ahead of humanity that will probably condition a lot of the infrastructure activity in the next few decades. Combined with that, of course, now is energy security, which broadly pulls in the same direction, but not completely. Obviously, it perhaps relativizes a bit the decarbonization agenda at the benefit of the near-term energy security, which I hope doesn't distract too much, and I hope that somewhat dissolves. And together with that, I think a requirement for agility and speed in the finance sector. I mean, I also wanted to comment in relation to what you mentioned about decentralized finance, etc. Of course, slightly controversial topics, but any liquidity pool, and those pools are now massive, should be explored. I mean, we are in the business of basically comparing, contrasting, and attracting competing liquidity pools for a given investment opportunity. In broad terms, that's what we do for our clients. And therefore, no stone unturned. And there are some commonalities between infrastructure and some of the decentralized finance. It has to do with the challenges of banks of coping with the regulatory environment they're in, and therefore not being able to cater for segments of the economy in terms of, again, decorrelation, being a repository of value independent of economic volatility linked to policies. There are also challenges in relation to perhaps the short-termist nature. But I think that's perhaps an area for R&D that I'd like to take up. But we'll see how central it becomes or not.
Absolutely. And if we look at just the past few years, the amount of wealth generated by just simply cryptocurrencies is unparalleled in human history, how quickly and how much has been created. So it's an area that is truly just beginning, but something to monitor. Continuing to look at innovations and key elements of our economy. Bart, if you have any other ideas on how we can prioritize perhaps going into building our future economies.
I think we're only seeing the beginning right now of what innovation brings to performance in general. And let me be concrete with examples. And talking about operational excellence, getting the most out of the plans, it used to be done first with notebooks and reading meters, then it was done with spreadsheets, now it is done in a digital way with remote monitoring and artificial intelligence behind it, or Dr. Lana has given a presentation here about the way we do it. But it's only the beginning, because right now we're measuring, what are you measuring? Hundreds of data points which are measured on a plant by the digital control system. But with the changes in cheap sensing, which are becoming available, very cheap sensors. You can today have a complete chemical lab on a chip. You can do gas chromatography on a chip. You can do a blood analysis on a chip. It's in lab scale, but it will be available soon. Imagine how it will become possible to measure like thousands and thousands of data points. Not every 10 minutes, but every second. Imagine what then becomes available to get the best out of these installations. So I'm actually quite hopeful that facing this challenge of constraints in resources, there's also huge potential of creativity and innovation and technology innovation to cope with it.
Absolutely, thank you. Now to move on to perhaps unpacking something that you had mentioned earlier, Jose. This next question I think is for Chetan and Jose, but we'll begin with Chetan. Let's unpack a little bit more around green financing or climate financing. Sustainable development. These are things that are top of mind of every conversation now. And of course, around the world, but here in the kingdom. And so, what are your observations around what steps have been taken within the GCC region towards making green financing, climate financing more inclusive for all the stakeholders here?
I think I already touched base for some of these, but as you rightly said, man, ESG, climate finance, green finance is right now the buzzword, the centerpiece of the global economy. And what's happening right now, there are many avenues in which this green finance is being made available to across the globe. And the best part is that if a particular project of a particular entity or a particular development is compliant with the green finance requirements as set out, you have an unparalleled access to cheaper cost of capital, which is ultimately going to improve the economics of any project or development in that particular case. Now, what the governments have been doing, the government themselves, they have been the champions of pushing down the green finance to the various stakeholders. I mean, we talked about Egypt and Morocco. They have issued sovereign green bonds. I think Saudi Arabia and UAE are also looking forward for more such issuance in terms of green bonds. My colleague talked about the decarbonization efforts which have been taken by entities like Aramco, have been taken by ADNOC. All these projects which are doing in the market right now, these are making the countries more and more eligible towards increasing the access to climate finance, green finance. And renewables, as Bart rightly said, renewables is one such platform which is, renewables, power, wind, we're talking about now hydrogen projects, which is the next buzzword. Almost every country in the world is now moving towards hydrogen projects because those are clean, considered to be green, and there's a cheaper access to finance, and more importantly, these are the areas or these are the sectors which are going to drive the entire economy towards climate bonds, climate finance, green bonds, so on and so forth. And I think this is just the starting point. I think we see in the past 1 year much has been done in this particular space, and earlier there were a couple of ECAs who had made a conference in Abu Dhabi, and I think all the major financial institutions are willing to write big checks towards projects which are meeting requirements of green and climate sustainability.
Thank you. And Jose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this case, I would like just to highlight an example that shows that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia could be also at the forefront of the green financing projects. We have just closed within SWPC programs the BOTs for the ISTPs of Medina, Tabuk, and Buraida. All this has been based on a green finance of, roughly speaking, 500 million euros capex. This has been done by Acciona, by my company, jointly with our local partners, Tausia and Tamasuk, but also with a pool of banks in which 2 of the 4 are local banks. So in this particular case, I think it's a very good example of how things are moving towards the reality that our world is perceiving nowadays. And a very good example of how things could be done in this sense in the kingdom.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And now we're in the final 10 minutes of this panel. And I see that we don't have any questions because we have such competent experts on the stage. So perhaps if I can ask, we'll go down the row and just what your final thoughts are as we conclude our discussion on economics and operational excellence. Anything you'd like to leave the audience with? So we'll just start with you, Jose.
No, I would say that this is probably not perceived as a huge change, but it will definitely be, probably little by little, but we will be adding things one on top of the other. We've been talking a lot about the sustainable finance, the green finance approach, have been talking about the centralized finance driven by blockchain. All these things will happen, and the question would be what would be the pace of them happening. But again, with all the new aspects we are living nowadays in the world, we should have the state of mind and the approach to embrace these new changes, because definitely they will help and they will make us be more efficient in the way we deliver the final goods and services that we all need for life.
Excellent. Thank you. Bart.
No. Well, I think we have an excellent example with water desalination in the kingdom. In the context of sustainability, energy efficiency, I've talked about it. We must simply do the same for renewables, the same approach. We must do the same for hydrogen. Of course, there is uncertainty. Of course, there are a lot of new constraints appearing. But, you know, in innovation, it has been proven that you always have more creativity, more new ideas, more new concepts being developed when there are more constraints. In the most constraints places in the world, you also find most of the even intellectual property being developed. It's not a coincidence. So I'm really hopeful and positive in that sense. It just requires from us a willingness to change.
Absolutely, opportunity is everywhere. Chetan.
Yeah, I think obviously I want to say that the MIWA, SWPC, NWC, and the SWCs, they have been the forefront or the front runners towards enabling a extremely positive outlook towards PPP into their particular spheres. But and they're really the champions. But what is also equally important for the government is to have more such champions in different other sectors. I know it's in the making. There is a very positive progress on other sectors as well. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll see more such champions of government initiatives or PPPs into other sectors as well, which is ultimately going to be very beneficial for the government and for the citizens of the country. Yeah, so yeah, let's hope so. Yeah.
Thank you. Engineer Khaled.
My last word that PSP or the partnership is really you have to leave the meaning of the partnership with all stakeholders. And you play, it's not only documents between two parties, it's the way how you deal with your partners. And open-minded in a way that you have all of you one goals, you're staying with them 25 years, you want other to come and take another project from you. So the way how you do things, the market observing you, they are recording whether you are a trustworthy entity and agency and government entity or ministry, and then either they will come or they will find another market. So believe and walk the talk of meaningful partnerships, which is the way how we are doing in our sector. Thank you.
Absolutely. Honest and meaningful, honest progress. And Yusuf.
A lot has been said, of course, but looking ahead, we're at the junction of two very exciting transformations. Of course, Vision 2030 and Saudi Arabia, significant transformation program ahead, and energy transition and decarbonization again. I hope that we'll have a chance to meet again in 5 years' time, look back and not recognize anything that we experience today for the better.
That's an excellent marker to say maybe we can meet in 5 years' time and continue this conversation. So please give a warm round of applause for our expert panelists. And if you could just stay on stage, I believe we have some awards to give out.
شكرا للسادة المتحدثين في هذه الجلسة. أدعو إلى المسرح الآن الأستاذة منال الماضي، وهي مدير إدارة تطوير الشراكات في المؤسسة العامة لتحلية المياه المالحة، لتكريم المتحدثين. أولاً نكرم وندعو سعادة وكيل وزارة البيئة والمياه والزراعة للشؤون الاقتصادية والتخصيص الأستاذ عبدالرحمن الزغيبي، الذي تحدث إليكم أولاً في افتتاح هذا اليوم. مع كل الشكر نكرم الرئيس التنفيذي لأعمال المياه في إكسيون إسبانيا السيد خوسيه لويس دياز. ومع كل الشكر نكرم رئيس قسم التكنولوجيا في أكوا باور في المملكة العربية السعودية السيد بارت بوزمانز. مع كل الشكر أيضاً نكرم شريك سينرجي للاستشارات المالية في الهند السيد شيتان كابور. ومع كل الشكر والتحية والتقدير نكرم الرئيس التنفيذي للشركة السعودية لشراكات المياه المهندس خالد القريشي. مع كل الشكر أيضاً نكرم الشريك الإداري في شركاء كران مور في الإمارات العربية المتحدة السيد يوسف ماكون. ومع كل التحية والشكر والتقدير نكرم المسؤول التنفيذي للأعمال والشؤون الدولية والسفير الكندي السابق في وادي السيليكون السيد براندون لي. استمعتم إلى متحدثين رئيسيين وجلسة حوارية. ندعوكم الآن إلى قضاء وقت استراحة قصير، نعود بعده لاستكمال جلساتنا الحوارية. أرجو لكم قضاء وقت ممتع.